The current news story about these drones over New Jersey has me looking back to a couple stories we've done in the past, so I'm running a special double feature rewind on this week's episode of The Internet Says It's True. Welcome back to The Internet Says It's True, where every week we learn something that sounds made up but is really true, part of the WCBE podcast experience and available on all podcast platforms, also the NPR app and website. My name is Michael Kent. This is episode 217. Thanks for being here and tuning in every week. Before we begin, I do want to remind you to check out the Patreon. That is the best way to be a supporter of this podcast. I greatly appreciate the support I receive there, and that really helps keep this project going. There are some costs associated with this show, and your support, whether you pledge $1 a month, $3 a month, $5 a month, or the considerable amount of gold level visitors, $10 a month, that all mostly goes to keeping this show going. When you join, you get access to ad-free episodes, video interviews, and you get to hear news before anyone else. It's also a good place to talk about the episodes, find out more, and chat with each other. You can find all that at patreon.com/Michael Kent and connect with other listeners of the show.
I am once again asking for your financial support.
If you're looking for any last-minute holiday gifts, we do have merch on the website, so here's what you do. Your significant other has been asking you for ideas of what to buy you. You go to theinternetsaysitstrue.com, click merch, find the product you like, and send them the link. It's that easy. So this week is a rewind episode, but not the typical rewind episode. Normally I do these when I don't have time to get a new episode out, but this week I'm choosing to revisit a couple previous stories because I keep watching the news and thinking about them. There are two stories in particular that I keep thinking about, and this is all in relation to the stories we've been hearing about since November about SUV-sized drones in the skies over the East Coast, mostly in New Jersey. The New Jersey drone story started on November 18 of 2024. There were multiple eyewitness accounts in New Jersey, all reporting the same thing. Several large drones, approximately 6 feet in diameter, flying in the air after dark. The Asbury Park Press first reported it and was even witnessed by patrolmen from several local law enforcement agencies. The FAA was called and no one knew exactly what these were. Then, 4 days later, the FAA issued flight restrictions over Donald Trump's Bedminster Golf Club, also in New Jersey, prohibiting drone flights over the club, and this was in response to these large drones being seen near the course. Then it was reported that they were seen flying over Picatinny Arsenal, which is a military research facility in New Jersey. The FAA extended their flight restriction over that base as well, and these sightings continued throughout the rest of November, even causing a medevac helicopter to divert its landing in one instance. As December of 2024 came, residents all over New Jersey started reporting seeing these drones flying over their neighborhoods. Even the governor of New Jersey, Phil Murphy, said that 49 had been spotted on the previous night alone, and that they were reported as being sophisticated, often going dark as soon as they were spotted. In Morris County, the prosecutor's office told the public that the drones posed, quote, no risk to public safety, end quote. But they didn't tell anyone how they knew that. By the 10th of December, New Jersey Senator Cory Booker urged the FAA, FBI, and DHS to investigate the drone sightings. Many lawmakers and politicians were joining this call to investigate, some of them having seen the drones themselves. On the 11th, a closed-door meeting was held in the state police headquarters, and state lawmakers gathered to find out what was going on, and many of them left frustrated because they'd driven from all over the state only to be told very little information. They were told that investigators couldn't detect any drones electronically and that no one knew anything other than what had already been reported. There was even a Coast Guard vessel off the coast that reported being trailed by at least a dozen of these drones. That same day, December 11th, the Pentagon's press secretary, Sabrina Singh, acknowledged the reports, saying that local and state officials could take action against the drones if they threatened military installations. But she also said some things that got everyone talking. She said, the drones do not represent a threat from a foreign country. She also said they were not U.S. military drones, and she gave enough information to suggest that the Pentagon has a clue as to what they are, but they're only sharing what they aren't. And this has citizens and politicians angry at the lack of transparency. New Jersey Congressman Jeff Van Drew told the world that he had it on good authority that the drones were being launched off a mothership by Iran, a claim that the Pentagon has denied. The internet is buzzing with theories that range from extraterrestrial visitors to government contractor drones to a government psyop. So-called whistleblowers are coming out of the woodwork saying they know what's going on, but nothing has been corroborated. One person on the internet claimed the drones are XP4s. That's a model of drone built by Aerodynamics that has a trans-wing design that sort of matches the size and shape of what's being seen. Another person who claims to have inside knowledge says that these drones are the kind that the government uses to sniff for radioactive materials, and that they're conducting a top-secret drill to practice what would happen if a nuclear device were lost somewhere near the coast. And to fortify this theory, people are pointing out the fact that the US is supposedly transferring nukes to the UK and will be moving these types of materials for the first time at this scale. Now, I can't confirm any of this, no one can, and that's why everyone is so frustrated. Is it a top-secret military operation? A classified training exercise? A legitimate threat? Aliens? Personally, I think if it were aliens, it's kind of weird that they're using FAA-compliant navigational lights, but that's just me. To me, the classified training exercise makes the most sense, but we need to have a serious discussion about whether or not these things can happen over American cities without causing panic. There's definitely something happening. The drones keep being spotted, even over additional military bases like Naval Weapons Station Earle, and reported by credible people on those installations. Who knows, maybe by the time this episode comes out on December 16th, 2024, America will finally have found out what the drones are doing. But until then, people are talking all about it. And then there's the paranoia and mass hysteria factor. A national security spokesperson has said that many of the reports that are coming in about drones are people who are just seeing normal manned aircraft. But since there's already been so many stories about the drones, that's what people are believing they're seeing. Every social media site is full of claims of drone sightings, accompanied by photos and videos of things that are not drones. There have been more than 5,000 calls to a national tip line, and less than 100 of them have proven to be worthy of further investigation. And that brings us to the first of our double digest stories. On February 25th, 1942, the sky erupted with gunfire and anti-aircraft rounds. The ground-to-air assault went on for an hour, and the intended target was an invading Japanese air attack. But there was no enemy. The entire thing was a huge false alarm, and it became known as the Battle of Los Angeles. It all started in a period of time when tensions were high. Let's listen.
Hey, Michael, it's CJ down here in Texas. I was wondering if maybe you could look into the Orson Welles War of the Worlds. I've always heard that it caused like a nationwide panic, but lately I've been hearing some stuff that maybe that's not necessarily true. Maybe you could look into it. Thanks, man.
Thanks, CJ. I've always assumed that this story was true, and I love this story because it's sort of a breaking down of the fourth wall of radio. It's an early version of what movies like The Paranormal Activity and Blair Witch Project did for film, blurring the line between drama and reality. And I like it because there's something just a little bit ethically ambiguous about it, and that really helps to immerse the viewer in the story. And if the goal of art is to elicit emotion, this is a really effective way of doing that. So let's travel all the way back to 1938. It was the evening of October 30th, 1938. Orson Welles had walked into the Columbia Broadcasting Building on Madison Avenue, knowing it was going to be an interesting evening broadcast. He was scheduled to present the regular series Mercury Theater on the Air, a weekly hour-long broadcast. He'd been inspired by a radio play he acted in the year before called The Fall of the City, and that was a story about a conqueror that comes back from the dead to rule the city, but it was really an allegory on fascism. It made Orson Welles an overnight sensation in radio, and the style was something that was new. This new fad was taking hold that had been made popular by a radio program called The March of Time, the idea of telling a dramatized story as a live radio broadcast. Welles experimented with the realistic-sounding radio broadcast storytelling format a couple more times in the next year with an as-it-happens drama called Air Raid and a historical piece about Julius Caesar. But what he had planned for the Halloween special was something bigger, something special, and he knew it would be groundbreaking. He discussed the idea of adapting a piece of sci-fi for a radio broadcast with producers John Houseman and Paul Stewart. They decided on a 19th century piece of sci-fi set in England, H.G. Wells's The War of the Worlds. Howard Koch adapted the H.G. Wells work to a radio format for CBS by modernizing it. He took the setting from the original 19th century England to New Jersey in present day. choosing the tiny unincorporated community of Grover's Mill. The plot remained basically the same, aliens from Mars invading Earth. The dramatic piece began with a monologue similar to the novel.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own.
From then, the radio play took the form of an as-it-happens news radio program, even playing music and then interrupting that music with news bulletins. First reporting that scientists have noticed unusual gas explosions on the planet Mars, then getting more serious.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity.
The first two-thirds of the radio program went on like this, and to anyone who just tuned in, it would sound like a real news broadcast. There were weather reports and a supposed live broadcast of a musical performance from a local hotel, Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. In fact, it was Wells's intention to make these musical interludes last an uncomfortably long amount of time in order to add realism to the live broadcast style. A little bit after talking about the gas explosions on Mars, we hear about a strange meteorite landing.
Now, nearer home, comes a special bulletin from Trenton, New Jersey. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton. The flash in the sky was visible within a radius of several hundred miles, and the noise of the impact was heard as far north as Elizabeth.
The broadcast was so realistic, we even go on to hear screams and a moment of dead air, something that was a huge no-no in the conventional rules of radio. And using our own conventional rules of podcasting, we need to take a quick break here to tell you about some of our supporters.
Hey, I'm Cliff Baumgardner.
And I'm Harrison Stewart.
If you're like us, you probably grew up watching the Discovery Channel classic, Mythbusters.
From rocket cars to chicken cannons, Mythbusters proved there's no question too big, too small, or too ridiculous to put to the test.
Now we're going back to rewatch the show from episode 1, and we want you to follow along. Join us as we revisit every single myth, moment, experiment, and explosion from throughout the show's legendary 14 seasons. Subscribe now so you don't miss one.
I'm John DeSando, host of Back Talk. This podcast is an extension of the long-running, award-winning movie review show, It's Movie Time. Back Talk features additional content and banter with guests about new movies. If you want more insight and information about what's playing now in theaters and online, find Back Talk at the WCBE Podcast Experience on WCBE.org. You'll be happy you did.
If you love listening to this podcast every week and you want to show your support, that would mean a great deal to me. You can do that by becoming a Patreon member. We've got members at all levels, whether you want to pledge $1 a month or $10 a month. Just think about the value that you receive from this show. And if you like the histories and the stories that you learn about or the jokes that you hear, and if you think that they're worth it, consider signing up. For that, you get every episode ad-free and a week early, access to bonuses like the unedited videos of the guest appearances, and 20% off all merchandise. You can sign up today at patreon.com/Michael Kent. That's patreon.com/Michael Kent.
We're living through the most dynamic time in human history, and what we do as leaders matter. We are the ones that create the leverage to shift directions of our companies, our nonprofits, and our communities. As a leader or an emerging leader, please join me for a dynamic conversation with top thought leaders, academics, and executives to learn more about how to elevate your leadership. I'm Maureen Metcalf. Join us at the WCBE Podcast Experience at wcbe.org.
Let's get back to our story.
We take you now to Grover's Mill, New Jersey.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Carl Phillips again, out at the Wilmot Farm, Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Professor Pearson and myself made the 11 miles from Princeton in 10 minutes. Well, I hardly know where to begin. Paint for you a word picture of the strange scene before my eyes, like something out of a modern Arabian Nights. Well, I just got here. I haven't had a chance to look around yet. I guess that's it. Yes, I guess that's the thing directly in front of me, half buried in a vast pit. Must have struck with terrific force. The ground is covered with splinters of a tree. It must have struck on its way down. But I can see the object itself doesn't look very much like a meteor. At least not the meteors I've seen. It looks more like a huge cylinder.
Eventually, in the radio play, the Martians are attacking, and the broadcast focuses on the military units that are trying and failing, and we hear those broadcasts from the different military radios. Then, it turns to a supposed reporter on the roof of a building in Manhattan, watching giant alien machines attack the city. The drama intensifies, and then we hear the reporter become desperate.
Waits for the others. They rise like a line of new towers on the city's west side. Now they're lifting their metal hands. This is the end now. Smoke comes out, black smoke drifting over the city. People in the streets see it now. They're running toward the East River, thousands of them, dropping in like rats. Now the smoke's spreading faster. It's reached Times Square. People are trying to run away from it, but it's no use. They're falling like flies. Now the smoke's crossing 6th Avenue, 5th Avenue. 100 yards away. It's 50 feet.
There are a few moments of silence, and then we get the very first indication since the program began that this isn't real.
You are listening to a CBS presentation of Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in an original dramatization of The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. The performance will continue after a brief intermission. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.
There were only 4 instances throughout the entire broadcast to let listeners know it wasn't real. The opening, before and after the middle commercial break, and at the very end. The commercial break itself was delayed a few minutes later than usual to increase the realism of the piece. Later that night, 3 different times, disclaimers were read on the air to reiterate the piece was merely fiction. And the popular story about this broadcast, the reason anyone remembers it from the thousands of other radio plays in history, came about because of the many newspaper headlines that talked about it afterward. Headlines like, "Radio Fake Scares Nation," and "Fake Radio War Stirs Terror Through U.S., and a lighted bulletin in Times Square reading, "Orson Welles Causes Panic." The broadcast had started at 8 p.m. that night. By 8:32 p.m., the CBS executive Davidson Taylor was on the phone taking a frantic phone call. Producer John Houseman said Taylor returned to the studio looking white as a ghost. He had been ordered by the higher-ups at CBS to immediately interrupt the broadcast to announce that it was a dramatic work of fiction. Luckily for Wells and Houseman, there was a scheduled commercial break less than a minute away from that phone call anyway. That commercial break carried disclaimers about the program before and after, like you just heard. But as the show continued on, a few policemen entered the room outside the studio. Then a few more. CBS pages and executives stood in front of the police, begging them to just wait. The police wanted to barge into the studio and stop the broadcast immediately. They, of course, weren't allowed into the room. The program continued. The final third of the show was a more standard radio drama format without the realism of the news report break-ins and weather bulletins. We learn the rest of the story, that the aliens have now taken New York City and eventually have died of human pathogenic germs. The broadcast ended with Orson Welles once again telling the listeners that they've been listening to a radio play and that it was merely a holiday offering for Halloween. According to Houseman, the next few hours were crazy. Here's a quote from his 1980 memoir. Quote, "The building was suddenly full of people in dark blue uniforms. Hustled out of the studio, we were locked into a small back office on another floor. Here we sat incommunicado while network employees were busily collecting, destroying, or locking up all scripts and records of the broadcast." End quote. They apparently fielded a call from a small-town mayor who complained that his citizens were rioting in the streets. One of the reasons that is often given for the panic is that people were listening to another program on the radio, then switched to the War of the Worlds after the opening disclaimer. Another reason for the panic that's cited is that radio broadcasts for weeks had been updating America on the growing war between Germany and Czechoslovakia. So people were already on edge. They were used to hearing important news bulletins interrupting their radio shows. The newspaper headlines followed, and the rest became a lasting legacy. Most people today know the story about how this radio broadcast sent Americans into a panic. But there are more than a couple reasons to doubt that it actually caused any sort of widespread panic. Robert Bartholomew, a sociologist who is an expert on mass panic outbreaks, has said there's a growing consensus among sociologists that the extent of the panic was greatly exaggerated. First, there simply weren't enough people listening. One of the pieces of evidence of panic is this treasure trove of 2,000 letters mailed to CBS and Orson Welles complaining about the broadcast. But when they were scrutinized, only about 27% of those letters came from people who were actually listening. It was originally reported that 12 million, or 1 out of 12 homes, were listening to the War of the Worlds, but a survey was actually conducted that night during the broadcast. They had a sample size of only 5,000, but out of that 5,000, only 2% said they were listening to it. After all, it was up against the most popular show of the time, Edgar Bergen's Chase and Sanborn Hour variety show. Mercury Theater on the Air had horrible ratings. Another survey, which was conducted later at Princeton, estimated the real number listening was closer to 6 million. When those people were asked if they were, quote, frightened or disturbed by the show, 1.2 million said they were. But there's sort of an inherent problem with that question. In that era, radio had the power to move people. It had the ability to shock, to frighten, and disturb. It would be like asking you about the scariest movie you've ever seen and ask if it frightened or disturbed you. So this brings us to what is most likely the reason for the overblowing of panic. Newspapers. Newspapers, whose existence was threatened by social media, and before that was threatened by online news, and before that was threatened by television news. Newspapers were threatened by radio. It was in their best interest to get the public to have a healthy distrust of what they heard on the radio. So these many newspaper stories talking about the mass chaos and public panic caused by the broadcast could have had a motive, whether conscious or unconscious, of telling the public, look at this new medium and take it with a grain of salt because, unlike a trusty newspaper, the radio can mislead the public. Take the New York Times, for instance, who said, quote, radio is new, but it has adult responsibilities. It has not mastered itself or the material it uses. So while the cultural lore about the War of the Worlds is one of groundbreaking realism and a story about not trusting everything you hear, the truth is probably a story that gives much more credit to the public at large. And proving that nothing is new under the sun and proving history always repeats itself, the same thing happens today on social media. Celebrity death hoaxes are a weekly occurrence on Twitter. Fake news gets spread on Facebook by people who don't take the time to find out whether or not it's a true story. And certain news stations don't cover major news events because of their own political interests. So in that way, what Orson Welles was doing really was groundbreaking. It was one of the first instances of nationwide trolling. We've now come to the part of the podcast where I call a friend, and today we're calling Jethro and Matt from the Drunkard's Walk podcast. These guys have a really fun concept for a podcast, and I really enjoy listening to it. I want to let them describe it for you. The Drunkard's Walk podcast. Now, it's so good to have Jethro and Matt back. How would you describe your podcast? Because I feel like I was going to get it wrong. So walk us through, if pardon the pun, walk us through like what a Drunkard's Walk is, because that's a saying that I didn't know, and B, what the Drunkard's Walk podcast is doing.
Well, Jethro, I'm going to let you explain what a Drunkard's Walk is as a term, because that's what I always get wrong.
Okay, so a Drunkard's Walk is also called a random walk, and it's the idea that if two people leave from a common point of origin and then randomly turn at intersections, they'll eventually run into each other, which is the same as a single person randomly turning will eventually end up at their point of origin. So it's a mathematical idea that we have completely ripped off and not really applied any mathematical context to. But we've taken that idea and we've thrown it into Wikipedia. And Matt, I'm going to let you take it from there.
Oh gosh, thank you, Jethro. This is very unlike us, yielding the floor to each other. But we essentially we start at a particular topic. We started the very beginning of the podcast at Random Walk or Drunkard's Walk, and we get a topic from a listener, and we journey off through Wikipedia, only using the links on the pages to get from that starting topic to whatever that ending topic may be, and they're all random. We say they're random because we don't know what they're going to be, and they're being generated by our users who don't know where we're starting. So they just give us something that is either on their mind or something they find interesting. We've definitely gotten things that I had never heard of before, which is definitely my favorite types of walks.
Yeah, I have really enjoyed it because this podcast is also sort of a random trivia podcast, and so while my topics are always sort of since it needs to carry an episode, they sort of have to have a beginning, middle, and end. They have to be yours, or sometimes it's just like a phrase, or some sort of scientific thing that I've never heard of, and all of a sudden, now we're looking into it, we're learning how it goes from one thing to another, and then it comes back around to the original thing somehow.
Yeah, that's exactly it. In fact, somebody compared it to the show from I think it was the early 80s or 70s, Connections. If you've ever seen that
Not
show.
familiar.
I'm trying to remember the host's name. I think it's James Burke.
Okay.
I believe is his name. But it was a show. It was I want to say BBC show that was shown on PBS here. And they essentially just went through it would just start on something, and then it would be like, and this is how it's connected all the way through all of these other things too. They'd start on the telephone, and they would end up on rice pudding or something like that. It was this incredible connection which we hadn't thought about, but I was like, oh, that's a pretty good comparison if you've ever heard of it, which of course most people haven't. So
I'm sure also it gets, the idea when you talk about the Drunkard's Walk thing, the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon gets brought up occasionally. There's someone on TikTok who does a really interesting version of this where I don't remember exactly how it works, but they will just give the person a Facebook picture or a Facebook profile or something of a person, and then there's a completely different random person, and this guy connects these two strangers that have never met and don't know each other and don't even know that they're being involved in this experiment, and he finds a way to connect these people. He's like, well, this person went to this high school, and this other person went to this high school, and their teacher was this person who used to work at this high school, and here's that football team, and this football team has a mother who, was on the whatever. And it's absolutely crazy. I love stuff like that. It's just like the most rabbit hole you've ever heard of. And it's nothing but web sleuthing, and I dig it. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. I mean, and it also goes to show just how interconnected the world is. I mean, that's all based on a Stanley Milgram experiment where he just dropped letters. He sent letters to random people and said, hey, can you find this particular doctor in New York, I think it was, and just said, we assume you don't know this person, but send it to somebody who you think could get it one step closer. And they found that it took about 6 degrees to get there.
Wow.
Which is how, and later got applied to Kevin Bacon. Although if you analyze the IMDb, Kevin Bacon isn't even the actor with the greatest degree of connectivity to everybody else. You know who is?
Who?
Rod Steiger. So Rod Steiger has the lowest number of degrees of distance to everybody else in IMDb.
Yeah, it pretty much it almost, you would think there are some character actors with lower degrees than, some major names, because
the benefit that Rod Steiger has is that he had such a long career. And performed with so many A-list people that he showed up in a ton of stuff.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. That's really interesting. So I brought you on the show to talk about something about which you do not know yet. And I was looking at these questions before we started, and dang it, I think I made them too easy this week. Now I'm going to say that, and I don't want you, if you do get some of these wrong, I don't want you to feel bad, but I was trying to make them difficult. So I just looked at them and I'm like, I think you're going to get some of these. So for this first question, we're going to play for a joke. If you get it right, I have to tell a joke. If you get it wrong, you'll tell me one. And Matt's already told me he's got some ready to go. So
I do.
Here's your question. Number 1. This 1938 radio play caused panic because people thought it was real, though the scope of the panic is disputed. Was it A, Journey to the Center of the Earth, B, The Screaming Woman, or C, The War of the Worlds?
Yeah, I know the answer to this one, Jethro. Do you know the answer to this one?
Oh, I read that incredibly magnificent Orson Welles biography by Simon Cowell, so I know this one. Yeah, this is definitely War of the Worlds.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Although I do want to hear Matt's joke and your joke, Michael. So.
We can both tell our jokes.
Okay.
The answer, of course, is The War of the Worlds. And the reason that this became so interesting to me this week as I started looking into it is this last part about the scope of the panic being disputed. And it turns out, like a lot of things, like marijuana, it was the newspapers that really blew this out of proportion because they were threatened. And they wanted people to start questioning the legitimacy of what they heard on the radio. So while there was some panic, it wasn't the whole like cities of people running into the streets screaming like we're sort of led to believe when you hear the lore about the War of the Worlds broadcast.
I mean,
True.
it's hard to believe that the media would sensationalize something in an unrealistic way. I'm just going to have to wrap my mind around that.
Can you imagine? I compared it to sort of the today's, like, you get like the celebrity death hoaxes once a week on Twitter. You know, I guess, you don't really see them quite as much as you used to. But when Kobe Bryant died, I thought it was a death hoax because he was one that I feel like I would occasionally see Kobe Bryant death hoaxes. And when he died, I think a lot of people were like, it was kind of the boy who cried wolf with that. They were like, it's another hoax.
Yeah.
So here's a horrible, horrible joke. Why did the cross-eyed teacher lose her job? Because she couldn't control her pupils.
Oh boy.
I told you it was bad.
That's a real Laffy Taffy joke.
Yeah, these are all popsicle stick jokes.
Good deal.
I love it.
What do you got for me, Matt? You got a joke?
I do actually. I have sort of two. So that it's great that you set the scene with that because it lowers the bar for me, which I love.
Right.
So mine is what did the two hydrogens say to the oxygen?
What?
What are you doing here?
Oh my God.
And you know what? You know what my favorite thing about water is?
What?
I think it's pretty clear.
Oh, jeez.
Wow.
So what are you doing here? I can't help but picture the Californians sketch from SNL.
Yes. Yeah.
What are you doing here? That's good. Very good. All right. So you're 1 for 1. Let's move on. Question 2. For this question, we are playing for a strange or surprising fact about ourselves. So if you get it wrong, you've each got to share something about yourself that people might be shocked to know. And if you get it right, I'll share one about myself. The man who adapted The War of the Worlds from H.G. Wells' original book to a radio play for CBS was Howard Koch. What ended Howard Koch's career writing screenplays and radio dramas? Was it A, he joined the army and was declared missing in action in Europe? B, he was blacklisted for being a supposed communist? Or C, he was fired for inciting panic with the War of the Worlds?
Well,
this one I do not know for sure the answer to.
I don't know, but I suspect it's communism. Because the Mercury Theater were the ones who did War of the Worlds, and they had a big success on Broadway with The Cradle Will Rock, which later got made into a film, I think by Tim Robbins, like a decade or so ago. But they were all big lefty socialist types, and I would not at all be surprised, given the House Un-American Activities Commission and their keen interest in anybody who was socialist or communist. It seems like that is a heavy possibility.
I love your reasoning, Jethro, but I don't think you're right. Because if the movie Clue taught me anything, it's that communism is always a red herring. So I'm going to have to go with A, about him being declared missing in Europe.
All right. Well, for the correct answer, we now go to Howard Koch himself. I'm just kidding. He's long dead. He's that would be awesome. No. So the answer is B. He was blacklisted for being a supposed communist. Jethro is right. Matt, you are 1 for 2. Jethro is 2 for 0. This was okay. So at 1943, at the request of Jack L. Warner of Warner Brothers, Koch wrote the screenplay for Mission to Moscow. The movie subsequently spawned controversy because of its positive portrayal of Stalin and the Soviet Union. After the war, Koch was fired by Warner because Koch was denounced as a communist. He was then criticized by the very committee mentioned by Jethro, the HUAC, for his outspoken leftist political views. He was blacklisted by 51. Wow. So now he did finish his career writing, but I believe he had to move to Europe to do that. So.
Where they probably couldn't find him at some point, right? So in a way, we're both right.
I don't think he joined the army, which was necessary for A to be true.
Well, at least not the U.S. Army.
Yeah,
maybe a different one.
Comrade Koch. Yes. So let's see, Matt. Do you have something surprising or strange that we would learn about you?
I am part of a group that is in the Guinness Book of World Records.
What for?
Yeah, for the longest musical march. I was involved in that in 1996. We broke the world record for the longest consecutive musical march.
Okay, what you played an instrument?
I did, yes. I played the saxophone. Was in marching band all through high school. Was the drum major, all that jazz. So,
and when you say longest musical march, like distance, that's what this is
distance.
Referring to?
So a friend of mine decided that he wanted to do this and kind of organize it as a fundraiser. And we marched 50.2 miles.
Oh my gosh!
By marching around a shopping mall, like the outside of a shopping mall, 20-something times, because it was like a 2-mile.
That is horrible
route. Yeah.
That's horrible. When I was in the Ohio State marching band, we marched in a parade that was like 4 miles, and it was awful. That was a really long parade. Now, granted, we were doing, a full, alternating between 180 and 120 beats per minute, playing songs the whole way, and like full out, but it was awful. And people complained before us, people that had been in the band before and after, complained about the Rose Bowl parade, which is, I believe, 5 or 6 miles. But that's well, okay. So I, since Jethro got this right, I owe you another a fact about myself, and I'll stick with a marching band one. When I was in the Ohio State band, I believe it was my second year in the band, I was actually suspended from a game. So this would have been the 1999 Penn State home game. I was suspended because when the band shows up if it's a noon kick, the band shows up at 9 and band showed up at 7 and the drums, that's right, the drum section would show up at 5. And we would be on the field practicing at 5:30, just the drums practicing the pregame entrance. And they had installed a new ramp. They had renovated the stadium, installed a new ramp onto the field with a new gate. And even though we had gone through the legwork of having them, let them know that we needed to be on the field and open that gate, no one did. And so me and I think like 2 or 3 other people, we sort of broke the gate so that we could get into the field. And it caused a huge thing. It was a big deal, and looking back, it's like so silly, but they, the athletic department people were trying to say I was going to be slammed with breaking and entering and all this stuff, but I needed the section to practice. So this is actually my 4th year because I was a squad leader of the section at that point. So yeah, that was my suspension.
The one thing that strains credulity about your story, Michael, is the idea that percussionists would be early for anything.
This is true.
I've known too many drummers to know that they're going to show up 2 hours earlier than the rest of the band.
That was 20 years ago, and to this day, I am early for everything because of that band. The saying, and it's a saying with a lot of groups, but to be early is to be on time is to be late is to be forgotten. And that, if you were, and we literally, I remember being on trips when the band bus would leave and there were people chasing it because they were a few minutes late. That was a real rule. And to this day, like I said, I am still early for everything because of it. Wow. Which drives me crazy.
There's an old quote, I forget who said it, but I know people who've made careers out of just being on time.
Yeah.
Like it's astounding to me that there are grown people who have so many aspects of their lives together who can't figure out that, oh yeah, showing up on time is a courtesy to the people you're meeting. And
I would love to be on time, but my curse is that I have to be early for everything, and sometimes unreasonably so. So I always book the first flight into whatever city I'm getting into, and then have extra time, because I'm like, I'm going to miss it. I have a little bit of anxiety about that. And if I'm driving, I get to the city too soon, and which is sometimes cool because I get to go out and see local things, which is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to be just on time once.
How early do you arrive at the airport?
At the airport, okay, so home airport is a different story than away airport. So away airport, I generally shoot for 2 hours before the flight.
Mm-hmm.
Home airport, I will sometimes wake up 2 hours before the flight. Because I know things are figured out. I know exactly what everything takes, and there are less variables. Also now it's different now. Everything's a little bit different now with flying. There are many more variables now, but I just knew how long it takes. It took 15 minutes to get from my house to the parking lot at the airport. 10 minutes to get through from there through security. It's all timed out really well. So, all in all, I might be sitting there with 45 minutes until I board, which is a great amount of time to, it's not too much. It gives me time to get a coffee. But yeah, when I'm in a weird city, I don't know, like sometimes you get there and they don't have like A-list for Southwest, and then you gotta wait in a long line that you weren't anticipating, and it's that one where there's like a sports team in front of you. And it just takes forever.
Or a marching band.
Or a marching band in front of you. And they're like, we're making a Guinness World Record for the longest airplane wait. And then you gotta
and we were all here early because otherwise we would have been in trouble. So.
Yeah, that's true. Yep. Well, question 3. For this question, we're playing for an IOU for a coveted The Internet Says It's True sticker. These are very hard to come by, extremely valuable, and completely run out at this point. Here's your question. In another instance of people mistaking a work of dramatic fiction for reality, a movie director, Ruggero Deodato, I think is how you pronounce that, Ruggero Deodato, was once arrested for murder because authorities believed people in the film were actually being killed. Which one of these was the film? A, The Blair Witch Project, 1999. B, Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. Or C, Long Pigs, 2007.
Ooh.
Wow.
Well, I'll throw Blair Witch right out. Because I feel like that was a big sensation, and people knew enough about that movie that and also I don't remember anyone. I mean, I saw it once in the theater because I got swept up this was like the first not the first, but it was a big phenomenon in the 90s about like they made it themselves on a shoestring budget, and it's the darling of Sundance. And
the idea behind that was it was found footage, right? So if there was a director, in that story, then that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I agree with you. I would eliminate that as well.
All right. So now we have Cannibal Holocaust. Was that?
Cannibal Holocaust or Long Pigs.
So Long Pig. I do know that Long Pig.
Hang on just a second. I'm losing the audio here for a second. Okay. Go ahead on that one again.
So I do know this. Long Pig is what cannibals in, I believe, Papua New Guinea refer to human meat as.
Oh.
So both films have a cannibal flavor to them, if you'll pardon the mild wordplay.
I will not pardon it.
Well, you're going to get more of it.
Good.
I've got a meaty... In fact, Matt, you're looking rather delicious this evening.
What are you talking about?
So they're both cannibal movies then.
Yeah.
If my guess about Long Pig is correct. But Cannibal Holocaust has a much more provocative title.
It does. In 1980, I feel like it feels like there's a greater chance of that type of thing happening in 1980
because people
versus
were dumber
2007.
in the past. Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that?
What's that?
Well, 1980 was like around the time of Satanic Panic in the States, where people were freaking out about everything. So I think maybe there's a good chance. And also, when you have the internet, it's so much easier to look up information about a movie. And Long Pig was what, 2007?
Yeah, 2007. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that's during internet time. So yeah, I like Cannibal Holocaust 1980. Final answer.
All right, Jethro. How about you, Matt?
I'm going to go with Long Pig.
Okay, you're going with the Long Pig, 2007.
Just to be different.
The answer is Cannibal Holocaust 1980. And Jethro, 3 for 3. Matt, 1 for 3. So the charges were dropped once the guy proved that the actors had not been brutally murdered. However, this is interesting. He could not provide that same evidence for the animals that appeared in Cannibal Holocaust. He initially denied that any animals had been harmed. It turned out that many actually were, and as a result, the film was widely banned due to the cruelty to animals. So it became really hard to find that movie. It became sort of an underground cult classic. But yeah, when it came out, people thought that he was actually having people murdered on camera.
Wow. I remember that was so, like, I don't know if you guys ever saw Faces of Death.
Yeah.
There's like a whole series of things where allegedly like actual murders were there in the movie. Yeah, and I have no idea of the veracity of that or not.
Well, from what I understand, it was mixed because some of a lot of that footage was faked. You know, there was a very famous electrocution scene in a prison that was faked. There was a very famous magician sawing someone in half on accident, you know, with blood and everything, and that was fake. But I think they actually they sprinkled in like news footage of real things happening. You know, like I tend to think that there was maybe one of the Iranian hostage crisis was in a scene on, I don't know. Those were the popular videos to rent from Blockbuster when I was a kid. Like when you get a bunch of guys together, you get, I got Faces of Death. You know, they had one in. And you watch.
We got my dad to rent it for us. Me and my two brothers.
Yes.
And from that moment on, I questioned my dad's judgment because, like, why the hell would you rent Faces of Death for your teenage children?
Because he asked for it. That's why. That's all you need. So, Jethro, you get a sticker. Matt, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. This is just for those that don't listen to Drunkard's Walk. This is exactly how it goes every time. Jethro has an idea, and he's like, "I think this is the right way to go," and I say, "No, it's definitely not," and then it absolutely is 100% of the time. So I'm glad that we're just playing into the same brand here.
Yeah. Well, don't think that I'm not going to snip a bit of Michael's dialogue from earlier when he said Jethro is right and just play that on a loop in the background.
And over. You can use it, as like an audio drop throughout different episodes.
I'm going to be like a drive time DJ with my whammo button. Jethro is right.
Great. That'll be great.
For this
now the pressure's on. I got to get the fourth question right.
Yeah, and I have a feeling you both will get this next one right because, I just have a feeling you guys know this. For this question, we're going to play for a plug on your podcast. So if you get it wrong, you've got to plug this show on your own show. If you get it right, I'm happy to plug your show on next week's episode of this show. So here it is. Orson Welles starred in Citizen Kane, which obviously many film aficionados call the greatest of all time, very close to that time that he performed the War of the Worlds radio broadcast. The two were very close chronologically. Was Citizen Kane before or after the War of the Worlds?
Oh, no. So I feel like Citizen Kane is 39? Does that sound right, Jethro? Do you have any memory?
I'm not helping you on this
one,
Matt. You're on your own.
Oh, do you know?
I know.
You see, Jethro's confident in this one.
I mean, to be fair, though, I'm confident even when I'm wrong. So that's not really a signifier.
That's fair. But you know which one came first already? Like, you don't even have to try to figure it out? You already know this?
Correct.
Oh, that's a shame.
But I want to watch you struggle, so go ahead.
So you're going to make me answer first.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So I guess I seem to think that War of the Worlds came first. I don't know why, because in my mind that's 38 and Citizen Kane is 39, but I could have that all mixed up. So, but I'm going to say I'm not sure which way you asked the question, but I'm going to say War of the Worlds came first. Citizen Kane came second. That's my.
All right, and Jethro?
War of the Worlds definitely came first. Citizen Kane was 1941, I believe.
Oh.
The answer is both of you are correct. 1941 was Citizen Kane. War of the Worlds was 1938. Citizen Kane really, even though, Orson Welles had really become very popular on radio just before War of the Worlds, like the year before. War of the Worlds made him like national celebrity. Citizen Kane even more so. And it's kind of interesting to see some of the production on Citizen Kane very similar to some of the people that worked on War of the Worlds, including the composer for both was Bernard. Let me look this up because I looked it up earlier, and I don't want to get it wrong. 1938. Bernard. Some of the people who are listening who know this are screaming the answer. The composer of the music is Bernard. Oh man. Now I can't find it.
There are two 85-year-old men screaming at their podcast right now.
Bernard Herrmann.
Bernard Herrmann. Yeah, I was going to say it, and then I was like, no, I'm going to be wrong. I don't want to say it out loud.
Bernard Herrmann and his orchestra arrived at the studio where Welles had taken over production for the evening's program. And what they did was they faked having like this ballroom jazz dance band playing. And so when War of the Worlds begins, you can hear them playing La Comparsita, and that is interrupted with a science bulletin, a weather bulletin about the weather on Mars and how there are explosions happening on the planet Mars that are observable. So really interesting stuff. And then he did, of course, all of the score to Citizen Kane. And I had no idea exactly how involved Welles was in Citizen Kane. It was writer, director, producer, lead actor. That was his movie. And
yeah,
it's been a while since I've seen the movie about the movie, the RKO 207, 281. Yeah, what a great biography of Orson Welles that became. So.
It's funny because if you ever go on a tour of the Hearst Castle in California, it's a beautiful place, but they bear a tremendous grudge against Herman Mankiewicz, who is the screenwriter on Citizen Kane, because he used to like hang out at Hearst Castle, and that's why he was able to get so many things right about William Randolph Hearst and why Citizen Kane got under Hearst's skin so much.
I love it.
And like to this day, the tour guides at the Hearst Castle really have a grudge against Herman Mankiewicz for that reason.
There's a lot of poetry here when you talk about like it was the newspaper's grudge against Orson Welles that really made War of the Worlds, gave it this panic. It made it famous, but it gave it this continued story after story after story, and then that it was really that same world, those magnates of the newspaper industry that he was punching up and making fun of on.
I wonder if Rupert Murdoch feels the same way about Succession.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to hear someone's thoughts on that. And I have heard a reaction. Gosh, I can't remember where I heard that. Somewhere it was like there was like a relative that was talking about how it's not able to be played in that house. Succession did an amazing job of treating Fox News with the way it should be treated.
And it's crazy too, because like these people, these moguls are multi-billionaires. They're the wealthiest people on earth. They have lives of immense privilege, and like they can't take any criticism. They can't see even a fictionalized version of themselves. It's banana pants.
Yeah, it is. You know what Welles said about the newspaper the newspaper coverage. So this was a quote from him to Roger Hill. He said this in 1983. He said, "It wasn't long after the initial shock that whatever public panic and outrage there was vanished, but the newspapers for days continued to feign fury." Mm-hmm. So he saw, he knew that's what was happening. That's the way he saw it, was the newspapers just attacking it for being what it was, a new medium.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Well,
and in so doing, they cemented its legend.
Yeah.
Like
they did.
If they hadn't done that, then we wouldn't be talking about it today. We'd be like, a radio broadcast from 1938? No, thanks. Not interesting. But the newspapers made him. They made the legend of War of the Worlds.
Wouldn't it be interesting if you could ask Orson Welles about that now? You know, I don't
know. There's a lot of great audio of Orson Welles being a real jerk to people.
They're definitely.
There's a famous sort of captured audio from like a Mrs. Paul's fish stick commercial.
Yeah, it's great.
Where he's just a total jerk to the guys in the booth.
The one for the wine where he's drunk is so good. There's just take after take of him screwing up. It's champagne, I think. It's sparkling wine or something. It's so good. If you haven't seen that, go look that up.
It's all. I mean, it may be better than Citizen Kane as far as
I just read this. This is interesting. In 2002, Glenn Beck did a live recreation of the broadcast using the original, Koch's original script, aired it on Buzz XM, and was sued.
Yeah, except Glenn Beck changed it so we were being illegal aliens were landing.
Right. That's right. There's a great they did a version of it in the 90s. I want to say may have even been the late 80s. I think it was the early 90s. Then many of the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation were in it. Gates McFadden was in it, and I think Brent Spiner. And there's like I think it was on NPR.
I'm seeing it right now. Yeah, NPR did one in '88, and it was nominated for a Grammy Best Spoken Word. I'm gonna have to look that up and find it. That's really cool. So you're doing really well. Jethro's 4 for 4.
Jethro's doing very well.
You're 2 for 4, and we've got 1 left. So you can still beat a 500 record here, Matt.
Oh, come on.
This one is for all the marbles. If you get this wrong, I'm banning you both from the show, never to be asked on again. Here's your question. And this to be answered separately. Other than your own podcast, and other than this podcast, of course, what is currently your favorite podcast?
Jethro, you want to answer that first?
I'd be delighted to. So I'm a big cognitive science fan. I have a degree in psychology, and I just love learning about the mind and how it works. And there is a podcast called the Psychology Podcast by a guy, I believe, named Scott Barry Kaufman, who just interviews different psychologists and sort of talks to them about their thing. And he's got a really wide breadth of people that he talks to. So some like real hardcore data people, and then some people who are more into what I would call the fringes of science.
Sure.
Like he talked to somebody recently about past lives, which is not really my bag, but it's at least interesting. But it's always a provocative conversation about, the human brain and how it works and how human brains work with other human brains. And I really enjoyed it. I learn something every time I listen, and it's always a provocative conversation.
How about you, Matt?
So I'm going to give you 2 answers because I have 2 favorites right now, depending on kind of my mood. If I'm in the mood to listen to, like if I'm just kind of working or need something on in the background, looking for some entertainment, Smartless is one of my faves right now with Jason Bateman and Sean Hayes and Will Arnett.
That's really good.
Where they bring on like one of them brings on a guest and then they just interview them, and they have all these amazing celebrities and scientists and composers and race car drivers, and anyway, it's very fun to listen to. And then the other one that I like to listen to a lot is Science Versus, which is where they take a topic that is usually in the news of some kind, and then they actually look into the science behind it. And it's very well done and incredibly educational. So I love that one.
Cool.
And also Matt has a crush on the host,
Wendy Zuckerman. Oh my gosh, absolutely. She's the greatest voice in the world.
Since you guys are both recommending science type podcasts, I recommend you listen to a friend of mine has if you're into social psychology, it's called the Opinion Science Podcast by Andy Luttrell, Dr. Andy Luttrell. And it's all about why people believe what they believe. He's got a guest every episode talking about why people believe different things. It's really interesting, and he's an entertaining guy nonetheless. So I also love one called 20,000 Hertz, which is also science topics, but all based on audio.
Oh.
So there's some really interesting ones. Sometimes it's about music. Sometimes it's just about different tones and things like that. So I like that one a lot. They've done some that are about sounds that you hear in the movies. You know, like what's the one scream that
the Wilhelm scream.
The Wilhelm scream that's in like every movie where someone screams. Yeah. Stuff like that. They'll do an entire episode on things like that. So, well, you both answered that right, which means, Jethro, you went 5 for 5 and get this audio clip.
You did it! Congratulations!
Yay, you did it. And Matt, you went 3 for 5, which is not worthy of the audio clip, but still a winner. It's better than 500.
Better than 500.
That's right. And I feel like a couple of those you tanked just because you wanted to make it interesting.
I mean, maybe there's some gamesmanship. Maybe it's just the showmanship. I don't know. It's some kind of ship.
You are the John C. Reilly to my Will Ferrell in Talladega Nights. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Better than Step Brothers, where you're both idiots.
That's true.
So you can listen to the Drunkards Walk podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts. I highly recommend it. If you like this show, you will like that show. That's just how this works. Jethro and Matt, I thank you very much for taking some time with me this evening.
Thanks so much for having us on.
The other story that I was reminded of was the purported mass hysteria that was caused by the War of the Worlds radio broadcast. This is a parallel that many have been making in the news. Now, what I found out about this story was a surprise. Did a radio broadcast about aliens cause mass hysteria in America in 1938? The internet says maybe. Orson Welles' radio performance of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds has become infamous as causing panic throughout the U.S. when people thought it was a real news report. But is that story overblown? In this episode, we talk about the radio play and its reception. In the height of the Cold War in October of 1962, security cameras at the Duluth Air Defense Center of the Air Force picked up an intruder climbing a fence. It was midnight and no one should have been in that area. The guard on duty shot at the figure and activated an alarm. Bases in the entire region were put on high alert that a Soviet attack may be underway. There was an error with the alerting system, and instead of the appropriate alarm for this type of event, a loud klaxon warning alarm blared at every base. This was the sound that told them to scramble the fighter jets carrying nuclear warheads. The fighter pilots ran to their posts and started their jet engines. But an officer appeared, racing his truck down the runway at the jets. He was flashing his lights and laying on the horn, keeping the jets from taking off. He had reviewed the security footage and investigated the area. The fence of the base did have an intruder. It was a large black bear. There have been several close calls and false alarms like this throughout history, where the military sprang to action later to find out that there was no actual enemy attack. This story is about one of those defensive actions that took place in a huge way during World War II. It happened on February 25th, 1942, in the city of Los Angeles. Just 2 days before, President Roosevelt had held his fireside chat with the nation about the progress of the war.
This war is a new kind of war. It is different from all other wars of the past, not only in its methods and weapons, but also in its geography. It is warfare in terms of every continent, every island, every sea, every air lane in the world. That is the reason.
In his address, he reassured the American people, but was blunt with them about the scope and seriousness of the war. Pearl Harbor had been attacked just 2 months prior, and while Americans gathered around their radios listening to their president, something else was happening in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of Santa Barbara, California. While Roosevelt was delivering those words, a Japanese Imperial submarine, I-17, surfaced and began shooting 5.5-inch rounds into the Elwood oil facility near LA. Pearl Harbor had shocked the nation, but now the Japanese had began to attack the mainland United States. For 20 minutes, the submarine fired at the coast, Hardly anything was hit, no one was injured, and the damages totaled around $500. But the blow that was struck was a psychological one. The Japanese had 7 submarines in the waters off the coast of California, and now the nation would know about it. Fear struck America. Cities on the West Coast issued blackout orders to their citizens, mandating that all lights be extinguished at nighttime to prevent the Japanese from air attack. This was taken seriously by most, but not by all. In Seattle, for example, when a few businesses didn't adhere to the blackout order, a mob of 2,000 citizens showed up to bust out their lights. People in California were scared for what they feared would be a land invasion by the Japanese. The state sent 500 United States Army troops to protect the film industry in Hollywood and nearby factories. And this brings us to February 25th, the Battle of Los Angeles. The United States military in Los Angeles started a counterattack on the Japanese. It started at around 3 in the morning on February 25th, but there was no enemy. They were firing at ghosts, and I'll tell you more about that after a few quick messages.
Hey, I'm Cliff Bumgardner.
And I'm Harrison Stewart.
If you're like us, you probably grew up watching the Discovery Channel classic, Mythbusters.
From rocket cars to chicken cannons, Mythbusters proved there's no question too big, too small, or too ridiculous to put to the test.
Now we're going back to rewatch the show from episode 1, and we want you to follow along. Join us as we revisit every single myth, moment, experiment, and explosion from throughout the show's legendary 14 seasons. Subscribe now so you don't miss one.
It was 2:15 in the morning on February 25th, 1942, when radar detected something in the air 25 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. Air raid sirens were triggered, and a mandatory blackout was ordered from LA all the way south to the Mexican border. Panic set in when radar contact with the object was lost. The coastal defenses were already on high alert. For the entire day previous, our Office of Naval Intelligence had issued a warning that an attack was expected. Throughout the night, every flare, every blinking light, and sparkle was reported to the coastal defense. So when thousands of air raid sirens were now blaring, everyone thought this was it. Mainland USA is under attack from the Japanese. Searchlights scoured the sky looking for what had been seen on the radar. At 3:16 a.m., the shelling began. The 37th Coast Artillery Brigade started shooting their .50 caliber machine guns into the night sky. This was followed by 12.8-pound anti-aircraft shells. Defensive stations in Inglewood, Santa Monica, and all throughout the Los Angeles area were firing into the night sky. One report noted that the air over Los Angeles erupted like a volcano.
Anti-aircraft guns went into action against unidentified aircraft in the Los Angeles area shortly after 3 a.m. Pacific wartime this morning. The anti-aircraft guns began barking during a blackout ordered by the 4th Interceptor Command at 2:25 a.m. The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
Finally, an hour later, the all-clear signal was given and the shelling stopped. The American forces had fired 1,440 rounds of ammunition, but had hit nothing. No bombs were dropped, no planes were hit, none were even spotted. The entire thing was a false alarm. That doesn't mean the barrage, which came to be known as the Battle of Los Angeles, didn't have tragic consequences. 5 civilians died in the attack. None of them died from gunfire. 3 were killed in the panicked car accidents on blacked-out streets, and 2 died of heart attacks. Property damage from the falling shell fragments was significant, perhaps worse than the damage caused by the Japanese submarine the previous week. There were many reports after the fact that attempted to justify the attack. Some said that there were enemy submarines with the capability to launch airplanes. We didn't know it for sure at the time, but this was a technology that Japan possessed and would use later in the war to attempt a failed attack on Brookings, Oregon. Some said it was a Japanese attack blimp. Others thought that Japan had secured secret air bases in the middle of a California desert or perhaps in Mexico. Those who were inclined to believe in UFOs claimed that a huge flying saucer appeared in the sky that night, and this was fueled by a famous photograph of the incident showing searchlights illuminating a patch of sky. When it was retouched for the newspapers, the convergence of light appears to look like a floating blob being fired upon. Paranoia was at an all-time high, and sadly, this is indicated by the internment of more than 110,000 Japanese American citizens in camp that followed shortly after. It's understandable to imagine the fear that citizens were feeling at the time, but history is the judge of whether or not their ensuing actions were appropriate. In the case of the Japanese internment camps, I think just about everyone agrees that it was a huge overstep, and to put it simply, wrong. After the war, Japan came out and said unequivocally they did not launch an air attack on Los Angeles on February of 1942, and we know that because we now know the truth of what happened that night. In 1983, the Office of Air Force History released the official report of what occurred to set off the radar. It was never a Japanese airplane. The simple story is this: it was a weather balloon. The internet says, the government says, it's true. Now it's time for the part of the podcast where I call a friend, and today I'm calling Meadow Perry and Daniel Greenwolf. Meadow is a bubble magician and musical theater actress from Philadelphia. She tours nationally with her unique and original bubble magic show. Daniel is a Celtic magician who incorporates Irish history and mythology into his performances. Meadow and Daniel, welcome to The Internet Says It's True. It's nice to have you on here.
Thanks for having us.
It is a pleasure to be back. This is my second time.
Yeah, Daniel has been on before, and this is Meadow's first chance to be on the show. And you're both hanging out in Philadelphia today, is that correct?
Yep, we're working on some magic stuff at my place, and so yeah.
Awesome. Meadow, if you have not seen, go follow Meadow's TikTok. The craziest bubble magic. I don't even know how to describe what you do. You call it bubble magic, but that does not do it justice. It's just stuff with bubbles that you have never seen before, like putting smoke inside of bubbles and making bubbles join with each other, and it's just absolutely crazy. Daniel just goes in public and paints his face green. That's basically all he does.
That's about it. I mean, we're a kill. Very strange. Very strange. I don't understand why I get paid for it, but, it's fine.
So you're on the East Coast, but our story this week is on the West Coast. So for the first question, we're playing for a joke. If you get it right, I have to tell a joke. If you get it wrong, you'll tell me one. Here's your question. Which one of these describes the event known as the Battle of Los Angeles? Is it A, it was a battle fought between the city's pest control companies and a pervasive rat problem? B, it was a ground-to-air attack on an enemy that the military thought was the Japanese invading California? Or C, it was a brawl at Dodger Stadium between Dodger fans and visiting Angels fans?
That sounds like a thing that
I don't know.
baseball fans would do.
It does, but like B sounds more legit.
That's my problem. Like, I'm almost concerned because I feel like for LA, the legit answer may not be the way to go. I don't know.
That's actually a pretty good rationalization.
But A is like way out.
I feel like A is more an East Coast thing. I feel like East Coast, we have the rat problems. And like New York owns Pizza Rat. You can't like
That's
suddenly.
True.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna go with B.
You're gonna go with B?
I'm gonna go with
I mean, I am the side piece guest host.
Okay.
Guest. So I'm gonna say B.
So we're gonna default to Meadow and defer to Meadow for it was a air attack on an enemy that the military thought was the Japanese. You are correct. That is the right answer. The Battle of Los Angeles was a battle that never even really happened. It was an hour of our military shooting anti-aircraft weapons into the night sky over the coast off of Los Angeles because it was basically a big false alarm. There was a weather balloon. Maybe it was carrying a flare. We're not exactly sure the details of it, but it was a weather balloon. And they thought that it was the Japanese invading with airplanes. And they were on high alert because a lot of stuff had just happened. This was 2 months after Pearl Harbor. And just 2 days before this, a submarine did surface and shell the coast of Santa Barbara. Didn't really do any damage, but that just had happened. So people were freaking out at this point.
Yeah.
Well, the submarine was run by Dodgers fans. That's
why you were thinking. Yeah, it was Dodgers fans. Yeah, there were Angels fans on the shore waving at them and taunting.
Yeah, it's a whole.
Okay, I have to tell you a joke, and so here is your joke. Why does the Omicron variant make a bad criminal?
Why?
Because it's so easy to catch.
No.
See, what I did there was I took an old joke and I made it new.
Yeah.
It's just like Omicron.
I'm
takes an old thing,
and makes it fresh. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm nothing if not current. Yeah, just it's a little bit different, a little bit more annoying, and doesn't hurt quite as bad. Question number 2. For this question, we're playing for a story about something that's embarrassing that's happened to us while performing. So if you get it right, I'll tell you one of mine. If you get it wrong, you'll tell me one. Here's your question. 2 months prior to the Battle of Los Angeles, Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese. They sank 4 battleships, killed more than 2,300 Americans. That date was December 7th, 1941. How long after the attack did America formally declare war on Japan? A, 1 day later on December 8th, B, 2 weeks later on Christmas Eve, or C, 1 month later on January 5th.
I was so young then when that happened.
But I don't know if they called it like so soon after.
I mean, that seems like it.
I feel like it was Christmas.
That was Christmas Eve?
I think I remember that being a thing.
Or are you thinking
the textbooks?
Are you thinking of that, or are you thinking the beginning of the play Rent? So that was Christmas Eve. That was another. Okay, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
24th, 9
Yeah, see,
p.m.
that might be what you're thinking. I don't know for certain. Maybe I'm a little more gay. I was thinking Rent, so that might be it.
I don't know.
We gotta pick something. I don't know.
I'm gonna go with Christmas.
Want to go Christmas Eve?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, boss. You were right the first time.
Saying B, 2 weeks later on Christmas Eve?
Yes.
Unfortunately, the answer is A. 1
day later? Was it?
December 8th. Yeah. As soon as the British government heard about it, they immediately just said, yeah, we're at war with Japan now. It was 1 day later, the day after the attack, that Roosevelt delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech to a joint session of Congress. And that was a speech that was calling for the formal declaration of war on the Empire of Japan.
There it is.
So I'm anxious to hear if you have a story about something embarrassing that's happened to you while performing. Either one of you.
I do actually.
I'll do a quick one too if you want.
This happened. This is quick. It happened this last year. I was performing in Brooklyn. Was it in Brooklyn? Yeah, I was performing in Brooklyn, and I was doing my bubble scarf dance, as we call it. Tango de bubble, we call it. And I was wearing this dress, and I didn't think about the routine that I was going to be doing ahead of time. And the dress had a really high slit. So it became an extra fun thing as I'm dancing with the bubble and trying to keep it from getting away. I'm also trying to keep myself from flashing the audience, who was also below me, because it was like an elevated stage. So they were below me. So it was a little embarrassing.
Wow.
I was like, I didn't realize it until I got to that part of the routine of like, oh, I've made an error.
You can find that video on Meadow's Patreon.
That's right. It's for the top tier fans.
Yes.
They have different angles of that.
Yeah.
How about you, Daniel?
Mine was embarrassing, but not because of a clothing error. Mine was just complete. It was our first day of performing at Six Flags New England. My wife and I, Bella and I, were doing what we call Guardian Angel, but what might more commonly called the substitution trunk, where you get a trunk, someone goes into the trunk, you put a cloth over it, someone stands on top, you lift it up, and you switch places. It's an old classic of magic. We had been practicing this. We had done this before, done this a bunch of times. It's our first show at Six Flags, which for us was a big deal because it was, if you're not from the East Coast or you don't know Six Flags, giant amusement park, very, very popular. So I'm the one who goes into the box. She puts me into the bag. She ties me into the bag, and I'm going inside the box. And then as the music is playing, she realizes the exact same time I do that we never took the curtain out onto the stage. And the curtain's this wraparound curtain that you have to put over the box.
That's
you have
important.
to untie and do all these things.
Yeah.
So I'm in a bag, in a box, about to go in. We both realize there's no curtain. So with the music going, she opens the box back up, unties me from the bag. I get out, and we're just playing the music or getting the curtain, madly trying to get it over. It is this whole giant process. I had to have the tech person like restart the music, and you just own it at that point.
Yeah.
You just own it and be like, you know what? Everybody has those days, and we just did it. It went over well, but I felt like such an idiot.
Just hearing about it makes me hot. Like I get hot, like just that type of thing. I have those nightmares where I'm halfway into the routine, or too late to stop the routine and realize I have not set any of the props for that routine, and then you're and I've had that happen in real life too. So it's not just a nightmare. Well, you are 1 for 2 so far. Here's question 3. And for this question, we're playing for a coveted The Internet Says It's True sticker. These are 3 inches square and they're sticky. And the only other way to get one of these is by joining the Patreon. I send them to everyone who joins the Patreon. You get a whole pack of stickers. It's just it's a fun little thing. And I appreciate people sticking those on things and telling people about the podcast. Now, our story this week centers around attack from Japanese during World War II on the West Coast, but similar stories happened on the East Coast. I had mentioned during the story that there were blackouts up and down the West Coast. Well, that also happened on the East Coast because of the threat of German attack. So these similar stories happened with the threat of German U-boats. One German U-boat sank off the East Coast in 1945 and was discovered in 1991 by divers. This is a multiple choice question. Where was it found? A, was it 100 miles off the coast of Florida? B, 500 miles off the coast of North Carolina? Or C, 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey?
If it's New Jersey, no one would notice in the ocean. They'd be like, oh, there's more garbage in the ocean. That must be New Jersey.
I feel like 500 miles off the coast of did you say North Carolina?
North Carolina.
I tend to go in the middle range because that's the safe option usually. I don't know if the Germans felt the same way.
I don't know. The Germans definitely didn't go to the safe option.
What matters is what the Germans think.
Exactly. What do the Germans think? Why did we ask that question more often? I feel like
are the Germans more likely to be 100 miles off the coast of Florida, 500 off the coast of North Carolina, or 60 off the coast of Jersey?
I think they're 60 off the coast of Jersey. I think they're just, for me personally, I feel like they're very precise. I feel like the Germans, they understand. They go, that's Jersey. And you know what happened was, I bet you they got all the way to Jersey. Then they got to Jersey, said, and then they went back. But by that time, they were already getting sunk.
Just thank God you do Celtic magic and not German magic, because that was a terrible accent.
Well, I know it was. I know. I'm aware. And if anybody from Germany who's listening to this right now or watching this, I just want you to know deeply, I apologize to you and your schnitzel. So there you go. It's very good. So what do you want?
I think maybe we'll go with that.
Try
that
Jersey?
Sounds good. And
what the heck?
Yeah.
All right, we are gonna say we're locking it in 50 miles. 50 miles
60.
off the coast of Jersey?
60 it was 60.
60.
And
60. Okay, I'll say 60 miles off the coast
It's a good thing that, Meadow, that you trusted Daniel this time, because you are correct. It was 60 miles off the coast of New Jersey. They found this German U-boat. And here's the interesting thing. When they found it, they wanted to know how it sank. It turned out this German U-boat torpedoed itself. So it fired a torpedo, which accidentally went in a circle and came back. And that's how that sunk. And it's still there. So it's apparently still a thing that divers go and look at occasionally.
Even blowing themselves up, they're very precise. I'm very impressed. Good job.
All right, you're 2 for 3. You're doing well. Now let's move on to question 4. For this question, we're playing for a video, and here's my idea. You're a bubble magician, Meadow. You do amazing things with soap and water. And if you get this question wrong, you've got to make a short video for social media. Maybe you're talking about bubble magic, but inexplicably, you call them bibbles through the whole video without mentioning why. Just a normal video, but bibbles the whole way, and you don't mention why, as if it's 100% normal to you to call them bibbles. Okay.
It's so funny because my autocorrect, it corrects bubbles to Bibles all the time.
To Bibles?
And Bible magic doesn't sound.
That's
very
amazing.
Act.
It is a very, very different act. All right. So if you get this one wrong, it's a video about bibbles. Here's your question. One of the most famous false alarms in our military history happened on the morning of November 9th, 1979, when Jimmy Carter was told that NORAD analysts had witnessed hundreds of nuclear missiles being fired at the U.S. It turned out to be a mistake, which was discovered just before the U.S. launched a counterattack. From what country did NORAD think the missiles were launched? A, Canada, B, China, or C, the Soviet Union?
I remember the documentary about this. It's called War Games. It starred Matthew Broderick, and I don't think that was a documentary.
I feel like it would be Soviet Union.
Well, of course. I mean, of course, you would think that seems like the obvious one.
Yeah.
Something again. I don't know. This guy wants you to do Bibbles real bad,
know,
so I think
I
he
know.
could throw that in there as because everybody thinks Soviet Union around that time, right?
Right.
You know, nobody expects an attack from.
No one expects Canada.
Nobody
Like,
expects
that's-
Canada. If I was going to attack America, I'd do it from Canada.
Right? Because no one knows it's coming.
No one.
You
knows
can
it.
technically be arrested for having said that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me say let me rephrase
No,
that.
there
To
was
the
an if.
people of Canada, to the people of Canada, I would like to tell you, at least you're not from Jersey.
So there you go. There's to my 3 Canadian listeners.
Yep. I'm so sorry. I'm so very sorry.
It's okay. What do you think? Canada, China, or the Soviet Union?
Let's pick one of
This
them.
is hard.
It's tough. It's
I'm
very
gonna
tough.
end up saying Bibbles.
You're gonna say Bibbles.
I don't know. You're right though. The Canada one is definitely like the
Seems so awkward because it seems like if they're gonna get it wrong, they might as well get it really wrong.
right.
Like I bet you if it was
All
from
right.
Soviet Union, they would have probably pushed go on the counterattack before it even started. That's my opinion. Like they were like, oh my God, like it's already, let's go, boom, because they just knew it was coming. But Canada, they're like, Canada? Can we double check that? I don't know. Maybe I'm Spain.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I can't decide.
We haven't, you know, how we didn't put China on the list. It's the first time China has not been on the list as even possible as a tax. China's pissed off at us because they're like, we can do it. What's up?
I don't think China's allowed to listen to my podcast.
Oh yeah, that's probably true. That's
probably.
probably true. You are, you are. I mean, for all intents and purposes, you are capitalist propaganda at its finest.
This is right.
I don't know.
Gotta pick something.
Soviet Union seems obvious.
Yeah.
Canada seems not obvious.
Yeah. You want to?
Just because it's ridiculous, I love Canada.
I like it. I like this. It's
Canada.
ridiculous.
You're going to say, hey, Canada?
Engage. Canada.
Yeah.
I cannot wait to see your Bibbles video.
Who was it? What was it?
Is the Soviet Union. It was the obvious answer.
It was the obvious.
I double crossed you there. I did the little, the little reverse double cross. And so you'll be making a video talking about Bibbles, and I cannot wait to see this on your social media. A lieutenant colonel at NORAD headquarters was given access to the wrong machine and accidentally punched a War Games tape into a missile warning component that the system couldn't tell the difference between the drill and reality. So everyone thought that there were hundreds of nuclear missiles being fired from the Soviet Union, and they did double check. So, yeah,
it was. It was the documentary with starring Matthew Broderick.
It was a real thing. Zbigniew Brzezinski called the president early in the morning and said, we're being attacked. And then he called back and said, just kidding. So that's great.
Wow.
I did not expect you to get that one wrong. I'm going to be honest. I am really excited about this video. Question
for the record, I should not. To admit,
feel like
I don't
you
have
guys
anything.
might have conspired together.
We
on
did.
this.
I might have talked you out of it very easily. I
swear.
have wanted to see the Bibbles video, knowing that it was Soviet Union.
Well, we've got one more question. You have gone 2 for 4 at this point, and this last question is for all the marbles. So if you get this wrong, I'm banning you both from the show, never to be asked on again. And for this one, I want 2 answers, one from each of you. So if you can keep the answer somewhat brief, that would be better. I've been struggling with anxiety lately. I think one of the things that helps take away the power that anxiety has over us is to talk about it. I think that's important. And so I'm happy to talk about mine. My last question to you is this. What's something that you do personally to help you when you're feeling overwhelmed?
Okay. Well, in a performance aspect, I do this thing I call flip the script, where if I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous, I change the word in my brain to I'm excited. So that's one thing I do to help with anxiety. The other thing I do is I take a lot of baths and do spa days. I pamper myself, and that helps calm down any anxiety and stress that I have.
Awesome. How about you, Daniel?
Meth. No, I'm sorry. Sorry. The method that I use is what I went to say. I would say, honestly, I'm a 3rd degree black belt in Tang Soo Do, which is a Korean martial art. It's actually the older cousin of Taekwondo. And I love training. And so if I'm feeling particularly anxious for whatever reason, I find that with Tang Soo Do, I've been doing this thing for pretty much since I was about 4 years old. So to be able to take those those things that you know, this is how they're done. I know what I know the first steps. I know what I have to do these forms or these whatever. So by doing that, and maybe I just take some time and I just go through some of those forms or go through some of that stuff that I know there's no question this is how it's done.
Sure.
This is how I'm supposed to do it. That brings me back to a place of, okay, I have control over this. And I'm not perfect at it, but I have this control.
You're cultivating an illusion of control.
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly.
That's fantastic. Both of those are right answers. You're both welcome on the show anytime again. Go check out all of their work. Meadow Perry, where would you like people to find you?
They can find me at meadowperry.com. I'm also on all the social medias, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Not sure what I'm doing there, but people seem to really like me and my bubble magic. So.
That's awesome. How about you?
Your what magic?
My bubble, my bibble magic.
Very.
How about you, Daniel? Where should people find you?
You can find me at Daniel Greenwolf. I am also on all the social medias. I've not been on TikTok nearly as much as I should have because some people they do so much better at it than I do.
Yeah. Meadow's killing it on TikTok. I get on there and I try to do magic and nobody cares. And then I make a voiceover video and it gets like 500,000 views like right away. And I don't understand TikTok.
I don't know the TikToks.
I don't get it either. I do like a super complicated bubble thing.
Yeah.
Gets like no views. I just bounce a bubble up and down. It gets millions of views.
Yeah, that one did amazing. Yeah, it's been pretty fun to watch. So go check out Meadow and Daniel. Thank you so much for being my guests. I hope that you have a fantastic 2022. Well, that concludes our special double feature episode. Thank you so much for listening. Now here is the voice of a New Jersey space alien.
Thank you for listening to The Internet Says It's True. To listen to episodes ad-free and a week early, support us on Patreon. You can do that at patreon.com/Michael Kent. If you learned something just now that you didn't already know, go to the Apple Podcast app and leave us a review with 5 stars and a few words. That helps us a ton, because that's how the algorithm works. I don't know what an algorithm is, but just do it! See you next week for a brand new episode of The Internet Says It's True!
The Internet Says It's True would like to thank the Patreon subscribers whose monthly contributions help to make this show possible. Sean Brown, Joshua Endress, Dallas Ray, Bryce Swanson, Eugene Anderson, Jim and Joanne Martin, Mitch and Andrew Joseph Kemplin, and the show's official Emperor, Kick Track. The show is written and produced by me, Michael Kent. The theme song is by Finite Music Forge, and all audio clips in this episode are used for education and commentary and used under Fair Use Title 17 USC Section 107. You can listen to past episodes by searching for The Internet Says It's True wherever you get your podcasts, and you can see bonus content at patreon.com/Michael Kent.